And this is the numbers game. Numbers sometimes lie, but we love them all the same. Let's look at some of the important stats, statistics, the numbers themselves in the SEC coming out of week 3 heading into week 4. First and foremost, let's look at the SEC scoreboard. The Georgia Bulldogs beat Middle Tennessee State University 49-7. Quarterback Jake Fromm went 10 of 12 passing for 128 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's not a bad number when you have 10 completions and 3 of those happen to be for touchdowns. Freshman Justin Fields came in and threw 6 of 8 for 71 yards and another touchdown on the day. Elijah Holyfield for the Bulldogs carried the ball 8 times for 100 yards. Tyler Simmons added 56 rushing yards and a touchdown. Brian Herrien, another 44 yards. And Fields had 31 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Kentucky defeated Murray State 48-10 to continue to go undefeated so far, 3-0 on the season. The Wildcats sticking with their scrambling quarterback Terry Wilson. Wilson went 19 of 25 through the air for 163 yards, and on the ground he rushed it 13 times for 80 yards and a touchdown. We did see Gunnar Hoke out there for the Wildcats, throwing the ball 5 times, completing 4 of those passes for 77 yards and a touchdown. Benny Snell Jr. had 75 rushing yards and a touchdown, and he also had a 43-yard touchdown pass in that victory for Kentucky. Tennessee blanked the UTEP Miners 24-0. Jarrett Guarantano led the Volunteers with 12 completions on 16 attempts for 168 yards and a touchdown. We did have a Keller Christ sighting. However, it was not a good sighting. He attempted 3 passes, only completed 1, and it went for -1 yards. Yeesh. But of course, the star for the Volunteers in this matchup was Ty Chandler, sophomore running back, who ran for 158 yards and a touchdown. Behind him, a couple of other pretty solid running back performances from Madre London and Tim Jordan. London had 9 carries for 74 yards. Jordan, 13 carries, 49 yards and a touchdown. And even behind all of them, freshman Jeremy Banks saw some playing time, 9 carries for 45 yards. Number 8 Notre Dame was able to hold off a Vanderbilt push, Vanderbilt giving them all that they wanted. 22-17 was the final score in that game. For the Commodores, their quarterback, Kyle Shermer, went 26 of 43 for 326 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception on the day. A dual running back threat for Vanderbilt led the way on the ground. Keyshawn Vaughn and Kyrie Blasingame carried the ball 10 times and 13 times respectively for 54 yards and a touchdown, that's Vaughn, and 49 yards for Blasingame. The star through the air was junior tight end Jared Pinkney. Pinkney went for 111 yards on 5 receptions, one of those a touchdown reception. However, the Vanderbilt Commodores unable to pull off the stunning upset against a top 10 team. The Florida Gators beat Colorado State 48-10 as a thank you for giving them Jim McElwain. My dog has opinions about this. Florida mostly dominant on defense, but here's some offensive stats for the Gators. Felipe Franks went 8 of 15 for 119 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. On the ground, Franks rushed 7 times for 25 yards. The Michael Pirine, the running back, touched the ball 7 times for 37 yards. Jordan Scarlett, 6 attempts, 56 yards and 1 touchdown. And the big rushing threat on the day was freshman Damian Pierce, 5 attempts, 87 yards, and 1 touchdown in the first time that the Gators have really used him a lot. Transfer Van Jefferson had 2 receptions for Florida, 62 yards and a touchdown. Not bad when you can average 31 yards per reception on the day. But as noted, it was, of course, the Florida defense that really won the game for them. Once again, Radar coming in with the hot takes. Florida had a blocked punt. Well, they blocked a Colorado State punt and returned it for a touchdown to go up 27-0. And then later on in the game, in the fourth quarter, Freddie Swain had an 85-yard punt return for a touchdown. So defense and special teams carried the Florida Gators much more than their offense did. Once again, head coach Dan Mullen having a few questions as far as how the offense is coming together, but that's a big-time Florida victory, and you can't really complain too much about that. Arkansas lost to North Texas. I mean, you saw that one. In particular, you saw that Keegan Brewer 90-yard punt return for North Texas, where they just left Arkansas behind. But for the Razorbacks, you had quarterback Cole Kelly leading the way, 16 of 35 for 185 yards, no touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Yikes. Behind him, you had 2 other quarterbacks come in. You had John Stephen Jones and Connor Noland, both freshmen. Noland went 4 of 7 for 25 yards and an interception, and Jones went 0 of 3 with an interception. So the Arkansas Razorbacks couldn't get anything going through the air. I mean, you would hope that, I don't know, maybe they'd get something going on the ground. No, not really. Freshman Malik Williams rushed the ball 5 times for 74 yards and 1 touchdown. Kelly did have 1 rushing touchdown on the day. He rushed it 4 times for 14 yards, not exactly the guy you want as a dual threat. But besides those 2 rushing touchdowns, no one else on the Razorbacks got significant rushing yards. In fact, behind Williams, the guy that had the most rushing yards was Chase Hayden, who went for 21 rushing yards on 5 attempts. Rough day for the Arkansas Razorbacks. That continued transition into the spread offense from what they had been playing, not really working. Mississippi State beat Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns, 56-10 behind quarterback Nick Fitzgerald's 6 touchdowns, I believe. Yes, 6 touchdowns. Fitzgerald went 14 of 21 for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. Keaton Thompson came in behind him in the fourth quarter, went 2 of 3 for 33 yards and an interception. So there's the turnover in the game for the Bulldogs. But Fitzgerald rushed the ball 15 times for 107 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. The return of running back Aries Williams, who had not seen much playing time this year, saw him go 11 rushes for 101 yards and a touchdown. Keaton Thompson rebounded from the interception by rushing 52 yards and a touchdown. Kylan Hill, the breakout star from week 2, had a less than stellar performance, only carrying the ball 6 times on account of Williams and Fitzgerald moving the ball so well. Did get 32 yards on a respectable 5.3 yard average, but definitely not offensive player of the week type of performance there. Through the air, Stephen Guidry had 3 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown on a very, very pretty pass from Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald seemed to hear all the people talk about his inaccuracy throwing the ball and wanted to prove a point in this particular matchup. He had that touchdown through the air to Guidry. There's another touchdown that went to Keith Mixon later in the game. Keith Mixon had 4 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown, and that was another dart of a pass from Fitzgerald to Mixon. So Mississippi State's offense on display there. Defense did pretty well as well. Missouri was able to defeat Purdue 40-37 off of a Tucker McCann 25-yard field goal at the end of the game to take that lead. Drew Lock completed 26 of 43 attempts for 375 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. And wide receiver Jalen Knox had a pretty explosive game, 5 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. Emmanuel Hall for the Tigers, who had been having the phenomenal year, continued a pretty good performance here. 4 receptions, 88 yards, no touchdowns to the air for him. But on the ground, it was running back Larry Roundtree III, who was a surprise star for Missouri. 23 rushing attempts for 168 yards. Solid performance on the ground from a team that people think or expect to be a little bit more one-dimensional with the passing game. They're able to pull off that non-conference victory, pretty big one, but they did give up 572 passing yards to Purdue's quarterback, David Blau, or Blow. I don't really know how you pronounce it. Blough. That's my bad. It might be Bluff. But he also had 3 touchdowns and an interception on the day, same as Locke. But 572 yards. Good night. That's impressive no matter what conference you're in. Texas A&M defeats UL Monroe 48-10. Kellen Mond came out once again, 16 of 24, 210 yards and a touchdown. Nick Starkel went 3 of 3 for 39 yards. But it was another matchup that saw a lot more rushing than it did passing from the winning team. Travion Williams had 22 rushing attempts, 128 yards and a touchdown. Kellen Mond himself, 9 attempts, 67 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, showing his legs again that we hadn't seen as much under Jimbo Fisher. And Jashawn Corbin had the ball 10 times for 64 yards and 1 touchdown. Solid rushing performances from the Aggies there. Number 1 Alabama beat Ole Miss 62-7. Alabama, of course, had we joked, a come-from-behind victory after DK Metcalf for Ole Miss went 75 yards 11 seconds into the game to give Ole Miss a 7-0 lead. Past that, it was, entirely the Tide. But Jordan Ta'amu of Ole Miss went only 7 of 22 for 133 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. A leading rusher in the SEC, Scotty Phillips, 12 carries, 44 yards. Not a whole lot behind Metcalf having those 2 receptions for 92 yards at a touchdown. Star wide receiver A.J. Brown was shut down for the most part. 4 receptions, only 34 yards. And, not a great offensive performance from the nation's leading offense. Obviously, Alabama defense came out with something to prove. For Alabama, Tua Tagovailoa went 11 of 15 for 191 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts, 7 of 10, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I guess matching his interception total from a year ago, which is insane. Damian Harris carried the ball 5 times for 62 yards and a touchdown for the Tide. Tua Tagovailoa, 5 times, 47 yards. Najee Harris, 9 times, 38 yards and a touchdown. And for the Tide, the standout individual performer was wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. 136 receiving yards on 3 catches, 2 touchdowns for him. The final matchup of the weekend was, of course, LSU getting that last-second field goal over Auburn. On the losing side, Jarrett Stidham went 16 of 28 for 198, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. But if there's any consolation, Auburn did have a much better game on the ground than they've had so far against tough opponents, looking at the Week 1 victory over Washington, where they struggled a little bit. Jatarvius Whitlow carried the ball 22 times for a nice 104 yards and a touchdown. 4.7 yards per carry average for him. On the other side, though, it was Joe Burrow of the Bayou Bengals who went 15 of 34 for 249 yards and a touchdown, leading them to that come-from-behind, last-minute drive victory. The star for the Tigers so far in the year has been running back Nick Brossette. Brossette did not have a very good game. Only 3.6 yards per carry on 19 carries for 69 total yards. Burrow, 22 yards behind him. And the lone rushing touchdown for LSU came from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who went 21 yards on 10 carries for a 2.1 yard average. So the Auburn rushing defense was really flexing their muscles on that in that game. It was, of course, at the very end that things kind of went sideways for them. Justin Jefferson and Derek Dillon led the way receiving-wise for the Tigers. I'm sorry, the LSU Tigers. Got to clarify that. Jefferson, 97 receiving yards on 5 catches. Dillon had one 71-yard touchdown catch, one of the highlights of the game. Those are the scores from the weekend. Let's take a look at the rankings and see what has changed for those SEC teams in the AP and coaches polls. Up at the top of both polls remains the same, Alabama in the top spot. However, in the AP poll, Georgia's moved up 1 spot to the number 2 position. They stay at number 3 in the coaches poll. LSU moves up to number 6 in both polls after defeating the Auburn Tigers. Auburn drops down to number 9 in the AP poll. They drop out of the top 10 in the coaches poll, going to number 11. Behind them, Mississippi State climbs to number 14 in both polls from their 16th spot. Before then, Texas A&M is finally in the top 25. Probably deserved it after last week, but they're in there now, ranked 22nd in both polls. Probably helped out by Arizona State being upset by San Diego State. In the AP poll, receiving votes are Kentucky, Missouri, South Carolina. And in the coaches poll, Kentucky is receiving a lot of votes, 98, almost in the top 25. South Carolina still has 40 votes to be in the receiving votes category. Florida has 3 votes now. Tennessee has 2 votes. Vanderbilt has 2 votes, but none of them appearing in the polls. The individual awards for the Southeastern Conference are as follows. The Offensive Player of the Week was LSU quarterback Joe Burrow off of his 249-yard come from behind, leading that last second drive to win the game. A solid performance from Burrow. Some questions still remain about his ability to really throw the ball efficiently, but he seems to be getting better. I mean, he went 15 of 34, not a great percentage, but it was for a decent amount of yards and, of course, helped lead the victory drive, which was probably maybe marred by some pass interference calls. Alabama outside linebacker Christian Miller was the defensive player of the week, having a career day against the Ole Miss Rebels. For reference, Ole Miss up till now has had the number 1 scoring offense in the nation, and they were held to 54.5 points below their average. Part of that is because Miller registered 2.5 sacks. Good grief. If he had 25 sacks in a game, he'd go ahead and be handed the Heisman. 2.5 sacks, 5 tackles, 3 solo stops in that individual. That was the best individual performance in what was a really, really good team performance on defense. Cole Tracy of LSU was, of course, the special teams player of the week. He hit from 33 yards, 27 yards, and, of course, a game-winning 42-yard field goal in that victory. Jalen Knox, the wide receiver of Missouri, won the Freshman of the Week award for his 110-yard performance against Purdue. Elgton Jenkins of Mississippi State, he's the center, was the offensive lineman of the week. He did not allow any QB pressures from his position as Mississippi State racked up 607 yards of total offense. 331 of those yards were on the ground, averaging 8.5 yards per play. And it was Jabari Zuniga of Florida who was the defensive lineman of the week. 2.5 sacks, loss of 25 yards, had 5 other tackles and a quarterback hurry in that performance. So those are your individual standout performances right there. All right, let's look at some of the team stats to wrap things up in this episode of The Numbers Game. We're going to look first and foremost at, so far, who is leading on the statistical offensive categories. In the top 5 of passing, of course, Jordan Ta'amu did not have a great game and has dropped down behind Drew Lock for the number 1 spot in the SEC. Drew Lock has thrown for 1,062 yards already and 11 touchdowns. Ta'amu's still in second place, 917 yards and 8 touchdowns. Kellen Mond is behind him in third, 824 yards, 6 touchdowns. Kyle Shermer jumps up into the 4th place spot, 754 yards, 5 touchdowns. And Tua Tagovailoa, 646 yards and 8 touchdowns so far through the air. Because of the Alabama defense, Scotty Phillips of Ole Miss has dropped out of the number 1 spot, so we have a new number 1 leading rusher in the SEC, and that's Travion Williams of Texas A&M. 339 yards, 4 touchdowns so far on the season, averaging 6.8 yards per attempt. Benny Snell has 375 yards in the 2nd place spot with 3 touchdowns, 6-yard average. Scotty Phillips does still carry a monstrous 8.3-yard average and 4 touchdowns, but has dropped to 3rd place for total yardage, 355 yards. Nick Brossette, 331 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Kylan Hill of Mississippi State has 293 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a beastly 9.2 yard per average, or per carry average. There we go. Emmanuel Hall of Missouri continues to lead the has taken the top spot. I don't think he had it last week, but he has 430 yards and 3 touchdowns on the air. Jerry Jeudy, 287 yards through the air for the number 2 spot, 6 touchdowns already. A.J. Brown has 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. DK Metcalf, his teammate right behind him, with 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it's Jared Pinkney, the tight end for Vanderbilt, that slots into the number 5 spot with 241 receiving yards and a lone touchdown so far on the year. Defensively speaking, Armon Watts of Arkansas has also jumped up into being tied for the top spot in sacks with 3 on the year with Montez Sweat of Mississippi State, Kenny Hebert of Vanderbilt. Behind them is Christian Miller of Alabama and Jabari Zuniga, got his first initials mixed up. Behind them, Miller now also has 3 sacks, as well as Zuniga, to be the sack leader. So those are the 5 players that have 3 sacks so far in the Southeastern Conference on the year. Miller and Zuniga, of course, both named outstanding individual performers in the SEC in Week 3. That's going to do it for the number games. I just need to stop talking. I'm Joseph Craven. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time around on Running Out the Clock.